Are we on the air? I'm just kidding. I'm just joking around, pretending I'm on the radio again. I used to be on the radio from 1984 through 2006. I know I don't look that old, but I was the program director and an air personality on an alternative station called Quad in Sacramento. It no longer exists. And that's the same story of a lot of cool indie stations of the past. They got eaten up by big corporations and then spit out and just gotten rid of, just thrown away. It's what happened to so many great radio stations of the last century, which I've documented on my website, playlistresearch.com. Thanks if you've been supporting this site since its launch in 2007. I'm pretty proud of creating it because it's kind of a zero budget site that I made from scratch, just HTML. Didn't use any web editors or any of that stuff, and just kind of put it together. And even though it's kind of a real simple site, it's got about over 1,000 pages of information on it. It's about music, past, present, and future. And I like to think of it as I'm working on the future. But it still has a lot of articles and lists of music from the past. So it's called Playlist Research because it's your tool for looking up songs and researching eras and genres of music that you would like to program for yourself for either your own imaginary radio station, which is what a lot of ex-radio people do, or for a real, station like your own personal internet station. Maybe it's not online at all. Maybe you have cool software. If you have a Mac like I do, the cool software for that is Megaseg. If you have a PC, PC DJ is the cool radio software for PCs. Now, I prefer Mac for everything I do. And I'm not going to get into this Mac versus PC argument. I've used both. Believe it or not, I used PC long before I started using Mac. I was programming radio back in the late 80s using a Commodore computer uh, with who knows what, some kind of DOS software or whatever the primitive thing was at that time. So, I just want to let you know this show covers a lot of ground. It covers music, radio, technology, and I want to talk about just all kinds of issues surrounding those topics and get deeper into the more elaborate discussions on indie music, like how an indie artist can make a living at what they're doing. I myself am an indie artist. I call myself that. I got some keyboards here and I got a guitar over there, and I sing, I write songs, but I'm not really trying to promote that with this site, even though I do put up some of my videos on the site to go along with themes. There's a theme section where it lists just like a ton of themes to songs, and then if I happen to have a theme for that music, then I upload my video. But the reason I do that is to avoid all the copyright issues. Since I own the copyright to my music, I don't need permission from anybody to post my own music. So, I want to discuss a lot of things surrounding the music industry and the radio industry, but I also don't want to lead anyone on that this show is going to make them famous. I mean, I had my share of fame in the 80s and 90s by being on local radio, and I eventually was on the air in San Francisco in 2004 to 2006, and that was probably my biggest audience, which was around 150,000 people, and that's kind of what I had. A slightly smaller audience than that, more like around 125,000 people when I was programming radio station in Sacramento. Alternative station Quad, the legend that no longer exists because it got bought up by a big corporation that didn't care about local culture at all. They tried to nationalize everything and didn't work. They're still trying to struggle with their billions in debt. And the reason why radio is so deep in debt is they just bought up a few big companies, bought up a ton of radio stations at overpriced valuations in the late 90s, early 2000s. They shouldn't have been buying at those high prices, but the reason they did was so they could take over the entire industry. Companies like Clear Channel, which became iHeart, which went bankrupt in 2018, and Entercom, they're not bankrupt yet, but they're billions in debt, or millions at least, and their stock price has fallen in half the past year. Not a good picture for radio. If you're trying to get into radio as an industry, I would strongly advise you to rethink that idea. Internet radio is going to be providing opportunities in the future, I think, at some point. Internet radio really hasn't become the big thing everyone thought it was going to be 10 years ago. But it is growing, and it's kind of growing at a snail's pace. There is Pandora, but that has like 70% of the internet radio market. So, and they're a kind of a multi-billion-dollar company, whereas most internet stations are just little mom and pop, have zero budget operations from people's garages or bedrooms. So, I want to get into all these topics and especially drill down into the areas that haven't been talked about a lot about in the music industry. Music industry, I used to write for a music industry trade publication. It was called Virtually Alternative, and I'll be sharing some of that with you. I wrote from 1997 through 2001, and it was about alternative music, but I'd interview people in the industry. So I got to meet and talk to a lot of important people in the radio industry, and there were still winners back then. But the radio biz kind of crashed in the early 2000s, and it was partly because of just consolidation, big biz buying up everything, then not knowing what to do with all the debt they piled up. So I want to get into that. The music biz is also in debt, although it has shown signs of recovery due to streaming in recent years. We'll get into that topic. We'll get into all the topics surrounding the music biz for this show. Thanks for tuning into the very first episode of Playlist Research's State of the Music World.